Can they hear you too?
Yeah. Okay. We are not experts on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There's a lot of tension, a lot of nuance, and a lot that we do not understand about it. So we went to we visited the West Bank over spring break with the intent to learn about what life is like for Palestinians. Not to solve the conflict, not to advocate in a certain way. We just want to share what we saw and how we felt. So first, to introduce ourselves, I'm Kjersten, this is Nadia. We're very similar, both born in Chicago, both American, but we're different in two ways that made us have very different experiences. I'm Christian and white, Nadia is Muslim and brown. First step was getting across the border. I walked through border security in less than 5 minutes.
And I was detained for 4 hours, and so was anyone who looked Muslim or brown or black or Arab. We were interrogated about our father's names, our grandfather's names, our organizational affiliations, our financial security, and how exactly we're financially supporting ourselves on a daily. We got a million personal and invasive questions. One of my friends was asked if he was pro-Hamas. He's actually a dude from Ohio who's not Palestinian. After a very traumatizing experience at the border, this place was where we wanted to be, the Dome of the Rock. It's a very spiritually significant place for me. But at the same time, I left heartbroken because guess what? There are 4.5 million people who live within 50-something miles of that place and are not allowed to access it because they live in the West Bank and are Palestinian. Here's Lifta, a Palestinian Arab village in Jerusalem that we walked through for a whole afternoon. All I could do was stand in the middle of that valley, look up, and imagine that this was once upon a time a thriving center that was essentially massacred from the top of the village, children included, and you can't not cry, you can't unsee this.
So this is a picture from a refugee camp, and unlike other refugee camps that we hear about that have temporary housing, these used to be tents, but once time went on and they realized they didn't know how long they'd be there, they're more permanent structures. One thing we noticed was there are water tanks on top of every Palestinian home because their water access is restricted to 4 hours a day in the summertime, and so they have to collect rainwater to get by. So throughout our trip, we saw a lot of heartbreaking things, but we also saw that there are a lot of cities where Palestinians are thriving, and in Nablus, we visited a spice shop, we watched how kanafa is made, which is a really great pastry, and just saw a lot of the resilience of the Palestinian people. I really related to the students at Birzeit University because I'm a student, but we learned that as they're pursuing higher education, their campus can be raided at any time, and students can be pulled out of classes and beaten and taken to prison, and I can't imagine that happening in our classes. Ida Refugee Camp was the most emotional place for me. You can see on this wall, these are all of the names of the children who were massacred during one event in July 2014. And then over here is a list of all of the villages where the residents of the camp are from that they can never return home to.
I hate going to the zoo, and going to Hebron, which is another city, kind of felt like that, except with human beings, children and their families. This was once a very thriving commercial center, but essentially with the occupation, all I saw were empty apartments and closed down businesses, and as you can see, caged in villages. And the residents of Hebron are essentially living in what is a ghost town. Violence towards them is not a crime, and the government, as you can see in this picture, is allowed to legally block off roads very randomly, which is heartbreaking. And I saw soldiers on every single street corner, and I just remember feeling very insecure, and I didn't know why. And so the violence and abuse of power is truly everywhere. So we did meet a mother from a specific neighborhood in this picture, and she was casually talking about her teenage sons who were in prison for their identity. She was casually talking about tear gas canisters being thrown into her neighborhood and skunk trucks that were kind of rushing by, pouring foul-smelling water into their windows. And on the way out, back to Chicago, I got labeled as a high security threat at the airport. I got detained, so did anyone who looked Muslim or brown or black or Arab, and they felt on my leg. They sent me to a room, they had me take off my pants, remove the Band-Aid on my knee to prove that there was blood, made me take off my hijab and comb through my hair, and they let me go. And at the same time, a very traumatizing experience that happened just once for me. But for thousands of people, it's happening on a daily basis, and that's something that I constantly reflect on, because there are people who literally cannot move from city to city without going through a potentially violent checkpoint.
I was also tagged as someone who needed extra security screening at the airport, but once I was in the security line, I was moved in front of people several times. And I honestly don't know why. There's no reason that I would know what the reason is, but it looked like I was just being pulled ahead of people who looked Arab or brown. And this whole experience has just really helped me reflect and internalize what it means to be privileged. I know that I live a very privileged life, but seeing it play out so distinctly was very eye-opening to me.
So what we witnessed was the reality of people who are living with with the restriction of movement, the building of a wall, the dangers of violence at any point in time. But what stood out to us the most was the sense of resilience among all the people, and that's something that I think is a lesson learned for all of us.
So for me, this trip was really just a glimpse into the life of the people that previously I knew nothing about. And there are certain experiences that I can't unhave. But I'm by no means an expert now, and I'll never be able to truly internalize what it means to be Palestinian, because at the end of the day, we both got to come home.
So what we gave you is a little glimpse into our experiences, but there are 5 others at Harris who also went on this trip, and on Tuesday we're having a longer event to debrief on everything. So come through room 1002 for lunch. There will be food, and everyone is welcome. With Courtney because she's amazing.
The question is specifically for Kjersten. When you say that you're actually open to people, running people's experiences being specifically Palestinians or Black and brown people?
Say that one more time, sorry.
When you say that your eyes were open to the experiences of a lot of people, was that specifically Palestinians or in general Black and brown people?
I think it was. I saw it play out in a Palestinian context, but the internal reflection that was going on was much larger in terms of lots of systemic issues. Because there's race that's on my side, there's religion that's on my side in this country. I also come from probably a middle class income family. I grew up with both parents in the home. There are a lot of things that I think I just was reflecting on about how basically the system feels like it's set up to make life easy for people like me. And I've never really had to think about that or see how it's not set up to make life easy for other people that don't look like me or come from the same background. Patrick.
Thank you both so much for doing this. It takes a lot of bravery to talk about things that are complicated, especially internationally. How do you think about the role of American public opinion in this conflict?
So I will start us off, just jump in whenever. I think the big thing we learned is that there is not as much awareness to what's going on. So, you guys heard a little glimpse of this story from just our perspectives, but there is a deep political issue that's been going on for 50 plus years that I think everyone needs to really get educated about, whether it's through, going to the right speakers and reading the right books and all of that. And so that would be the first step to do. And then, yeah, there's a lot of specific things that people do to, actively be involved in the whole conversation, but that's honestly the first and foremost, just get everyone to know what's going on. Especially because, sorry. I think something that was said to us on this trip was just and this really struck me, was that what's happening here is very comparable to what happened to the Native Americans in the United States. And once I heard that, it's you can't shake that feeling. We weren't around the Native, and so I think if you're able to kind of put that lens on, do your right research, it leads to a different experience and a different learning opportunity. Cecil?
Yeah. My question was also about public opinion. Because as some people in this room know, I mean, this is possible only because of the political and economic support of the U.S. government. So my question is two things. Like, how many people, like, how large do you think the awareness is amongst Americans that their tax dollars are going to the degradation, the humiliation, and the extermination of another people? And it's being done with the political support of those that they elected, be that Barack Obama or Donald Trump. And what strategies do you think you need to raise broader awareness around this political logic that is happening to change it?
I don't know. I think awareness is very low. In some communities, it's higher than others. Speaking from my personal experience, I tried to do a lot of research before this trip because I knew I was very ignorant about the conflict. So I read like 4 books, but like it gave me like just a tiny like taste of some of the stories. And before that, I literally was so ignorant, and I think my experience is probably typical. I can't know that for sure, but I think awareness is very low, and people have different opinions about. It's a very complex situation, and so I think everyone needs to become as educated as possible on the issue, but I don't have a strategy for how that should happen.
Can we just take David too, because he's great?
Yeah. I'm not always great.
That's true too.
I just want to know, so how do we have conversations about this conflict, right? So like in the context of Kjersten, why is it so difficult for us to talk about this, right? And what can we do to like, you know, just engage?
So I listened to a podcast about this morning. Thank you for sending it along. Not you. But I think so. There's so many answers that we could give for that. I think one of the reasons that it's so hard to talk about Palestine and Israel is that there's a political conflict, but there's also this element of religion and identity, and a lot of times, if you're on a side, the tendency is to kind of brush aside the feelings of identity of the other group, whichever one you're not advocating for. And I think the only way we can talk about it is we have to acknowledge that anti-Semitism is real, Islamophobia is real, racism is real, and talking about conflict requires acknowledging all 3 of those things, as well as lots of other political issues. And all of those in and of themselves are very complicated to talk about and very tense issues. And I mean, I guess again, I can use myself as an example, just that like, I don't want it to sound like I'm like super sheltered, but like, I just didn't have any idea of how complex this conflict was. And I think that's, again, I think it's typical that a lot of people, like, this just isn't on their radar, and so learning how to talk about it requires understanding what's going on, and that everyone's at a different level, and everyone has different ideas of the identity of the people in the region, and I don't really know how to tie that all together, but I think the main things are we have to understand how to tackle all of the tensions with with racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia, because it's all part of it.
And I'm just gonna give one more plug for Tuesday's event, because that's when we have to talk about